All right, what's going on, guys? Today I'll be going over my first presentation of a new series on coding and programming in TensorFlow without keras. So how I sort of see this video series is it sort of goes in line with my presentation series on introductory to machine learning, where you sort of start off with the very introductory basics, and then you go into some of the more mathematical fundamentals of machine learning. And then I sort of have a separate series that I want to do with this, where we're sort of programming from scratch in TensorFlow, and I just find it just works really well with again, for those who want to be developers and for those who want something to coincide with the theoretical approach of the other videos. So I hope it's okay that we're going to go over some TLDR. We're going to go over some prerequisites. We'll do that for the first video of the series, just to see exactly where this presentation series falls in line with the other ones on YouTube and what this provides that other don't. So I do have six or so bullet points that I'm going to discuss one by one. One being sort of the idea that developers are imperfect, Stack Overflow is your best friend. So again, I want to look at this presentation series in the context of other ones that are already available. So what you typically see on YouTube is that you have the you sort of have the TensorFlow tutorials. They almost all they fall into two categories. One are the ones that are drawn from scratch, so drawing a machine learning sort of a neural network from scratch, whether it be in NumPy or something else, and the other one being sort of the high level keras implementations. And there's good and bad for both these types of videos. One being is that the keras implementations of videos are very good for those who want to get sort of straight into the model development that TensorFlow provides. But one of the biggest shortfalls of that is they aren't realistic of any sort of work you'll do in the real world. So with those sorts of presentations, everything is sort of spoon fed to you. So you can sort of load whole data sets with just one line function, and that's just not the reality of anything you'd be doing in the real world. So I also wanted to mention that developers are imperfect. Stack Overflow is your best friend because developers, when you're writing your own code and you look at these tutorials, you sort of feel like there's a proper way to do things, when in fact a lot of the work that you're doing is sort of, at least for what I do, it's research, right? So nothing has to be perfect. There's probably better written code elsewhere, but the whole point is that you just want to be coding and working on something on your own. So don't worry if your work is sort of not optimized, and that as long as you're just working on something that's your own, you're learning, and that's what's important. So Stack Overflow is your best friend. Ask questions on Stack Overflow. Because it's there to help you, right? In case you're stonewalled anywhere. Developers don't have clean data for them, so this just has to go with, when you're importing these data sets, the Titanic, MNIST, and IRIS tends to be the focus of most TensorFlow tutorials on YouTube. That's because these data sets are used in the TensorFlow docs, right? And the thing is, these data sets have already been cleaned, and they're set into features and labels and tuples for you, so that in one line of code you can import them. The reality is 90 to 95%, I'd say, of my time is just organizing my data set in such a way that I can feed in my input. So it gives viewers of these sorts of keras tutorials on YouTube a false sense of security and a false sense of what it really is to be a developer, because in reality, data is messy. Most of the time things are in strings and aren't even integers. So you can't even, they're not fed nicely for you. So just be aware that data is not fed for you, and that in real life things aren't spoon fed for you. One of the other things that I've noticed, since most people have been doing most of their work online in the past few months, and most people have been stuck at home, is that people want to learn new skills at home, right? So you sort of have those websites like a Coursera or LinkedIn Learning that are offering these machine learning courses, right? You get a certification to make you feel like you've achieved something. But in fact, most of these tutorials are just there to sell you something, right? With very few exceptions. So the point is that if you can do a tutorial and get a certification within 2-3 days, chances are everybody else is doing it, and chances are you'll never get a, if I'm hoping the idea is that you can maybe get a job one day. The idea is that it's not really helpful, right? You need to really be working on your own projects. That's very important. And the point is that if everybody is learning keras, then no one really needs to hire developers if it's that easy, because in the real world, things aren't spoon-fed to you, like I said. Important thing to keep in mind. Um, Additionally, developers use docs, old code, etc. This just points to the fact that with a lot of the work that I do, I sort of do things from scratch. I have some old code. I use it for my new projects. There's nothing that says you can't use your own code, old code. You know, I mean, we're talking, as long as you're learning new things, right? It's okay to import your old code because you get to do new things with every single new project, right? So I just want to say that even developers use let's just say the TensorFlow docs, and you really want to be able to look at the docs when need be, understand what they're telling, understand what the arguments and the returns are, so that everything you do on your own. You can develop your own code base, and then you just reuse that. There's nothing that says you can't do that. And one final thing is look for excuses to work on small projects. This just goes to the fact that if you are doing some of these tutorials, again, where everything is spoon-fed to you, and then you have to work on your own project. For example, you have a set of data, you have a set of images, and you have to import them from folders and then feed them in and then randomize them. You need to look for excuses to work on small projects, because unless you have that background in sort of that pre-processing, loading data sets part, that's very important in any project. So you should look for excuses to work on small projects. I think that's very important. So watch a tutorial where you're working on a convolutional neural network, and then grab a set of images, 10, let's just say, and then work on the model with that. I mean, you can't really develop a model with 10 images, but at least you're sort of doing the grunt work, which is what you want to learn. And finally, at least for this section, is YouTube videos, buried entry. What this goes to show is if you look at the large assortment of videos on YouTube, what you see is that if their inspiration and their motivation is for views, what you're going to see is that they have a very low barrier of entry. What I mean by that is if you can, they're pretty much made for those people that, let's just say, download an Anaconda environment, and then on their Jupyter notebook, everything is imported for them, and then they can develop a model in 10 lines. Right? It has a very low barrier of entry. It's not a difficult tutorial because the motivation behind them is that you can watch the video and do it on your own. But in reality, at least with this tutorial, everything is going to be done from scratch with a few exceptions. And it has a high barrier of entry. So it's only for those that really want to become a developer, which is sort of what I see the motivation of this presentation series as. So if you're someone that actually wants to know how to think and do things on their own, you sort of want to stay away from those keras YouTube tutorials. So if you watch a YouTube tutorial and you see them using one of these data sets, chances are they're not really, chances are they're probably not a very good tutorial in the first place. And the reason why I say that is because, at least for this presentation, we'll be using TensorFlow to develop a model, but our model will have 2 features and 4 training examples. That's it. So you can develop a model with 8 samples total. Again, 2 features, 4 training examples, and the same rules apply when you're doing the same with a bigger model. So that just goes to show that at least with a smaller model, you can actually initialize and set up the feed forward and back propagation. You can actually see how everything's changed, how the weights and gradients change with time, because that is one of the most important things as a developer, is to understand what the model is doing and not just guess and checking, right? So when you do with small models, 2 features, 4 training examples, you can see exactly what's going on in the model. When you're working with any of these data sets, you have no understanding of what's going on. All you see is the model work, the loss go down, the accuracy go up. You plot everything. Let's just say you can plot it on sort of 2D space, and you can see the clustering, right, and the decision boundaries. But that doesn't give you any understanding of what's going on in the model, right? So a developer knows what's going on in the model, and a developer knows how to tune things to fit with their model. So again, these YouTube videos are just there to have a low barrier of entry. They're not there to really teach you anything, with the exception of a few. There's very good tutorials, so I don't want to take anything from that, but just be very cautious of those keras tutorials. As someone from a research and developer background, that's one of the shortcomings I see in those presentations. And just the prerequisites before finishing off today, before we get into the nitty gritty of what we're doing, just prerequisites. So you should have a very good understanding of object-oriented programming with Python. That is because most of the class models, the classes, the models that we develop are in the form of a class. So we'll have it set up as a class, and we'll instantiate the class and then do the feed forward. So you should have a pretty good understanding of what goes on in classes and some of the call methods and so on and so forth. So you should have a familiarity with that, because I won't be going over everything from scratch. And TensorFlow experience beyond keras. So if you don't understand how tf.gradient tape works, then this presentation is maybe going to be a little of an issue for you. But besides that, even if you haven't used gradient tape, it is very intuitive. Again, when you have the fundamental backgrounds and you understand exactly how back propagation works, then it's really simple, right? So I'd say TensorFlow experience beyond keras, right? So if you don't really know what's going on in TensorFlow in general, then this presentation won't make much sense to you, because I'm not using it as a TensorFlow tutorial, so to speak. It's a developer tutorial using TensorFlow. Okay, so with that, we're approaching the 12-minute mark. I think that's pretty good for an introduction. At least you guys know what to expect from this presentation. And with that, I'll see you guys next time.